Hello, Brav. We're back with Tried for Life by E.D.E.N. Southworth. Reaching the perilous stages of boredom on the second volume of a two-volume story. But we're halfway through, so let's push on. Hush, hush, he said, softly patting her shoulder, and then both became quiet while the business of the trial proceeded. The state's Attorney General, Charles Coldman, took the bill of indictment from the hand of the clerk and proceeded to open the case. Mr. Coldman was not the friend of the accused, neither was he her enemy. He did not belong to the old aristocracy of the state, neither had he distinguished himself in any manner. A successful lawyer he was, insofar as he had attained his present position, but no farther. He had never been admitted within the exclusive circles of Blackhall or shared its hospitalities, and if this exclusion did not make him the enemy of the lady of that manor, it certainly did not embarrass him with any of those old associations of friendship and intimacy, such as might have distressed him had he been, like nearly all the other members of the Blackville bar, the frequent guest of her father and her husband. Thus, the state's attorney could deal with the lady of Blackhall as he would deal with any other person on trial at the court. He opened the indictment and gave the theory of the crime. Here was no complication, he said, and no uncertainty. The case was so clear that it need occupy the court but a little time. He then, in a grand, eloquent, and highly colored style, described the murder. He drew a moving picture of the lovely young victim, whose fair image many who were present, he said, would recall with tears of pity. He described her accepting the invitation of the jealous mistress of Blackhall, and drawn within its dread doors as a bird is enticed into the trap which is to be its destruction. He showed her on that fatal Hallow Eve reposing in her chamber, sleeping the sleep of innocence and fancied security. He painted in lurid colors the form of the murderess stealing down the stairs that led to her victim's room, and the dead waste in middle of the night, creeping to the innocent sleeper's bedside and plunging the fatal dagger in her peaceful, unsuspicious bosom. He described the startled look and cry of the victim, shocked from calm repose by a violent and bloody death. The scene of confusion, horror, and terror that ensued. The dying words of Rosa Blondell, charging Sybil Berners with her death. He adverted to the guilty flight of the murderess and the desperate means she and her friends had taken, even to the immolating of other lives, to secure her escape until at length, unable to hold out against the authorities any longer, she had surrendered at discretion and made a merit of giving herself up to justice. All this, he concluded, he should undertake to prove to the gentlemen of the jury. He then proceeded to call the witnesses for the prosecution. The first witness called to the stand was Sybil's best friend, Captain Clement Pendleton of Pendleton Park. I thought it was Beatrix Pendleton was her best friend. He came forward slowly with a pale, stern face. He would rather have lost his power of speech than have used it for her detriment. But he was known to have been present at the death of Rosa Blondell, and he was therefore subpoenaed to attend the trial as a witness for the prosecution. Being duly sworn, he testified that he had been startled by loud screams from the room below his chamber, and that on rushing down into that room, he had found Mrs. Rosa Blondell bleeding from a wound in her chest, and supported in the arms of Mr. Lyon Berners, who was in the act of bearing her across the room to the sofa, on which he then laid her. Was there anyone else in the room? Inquired the prosecuting attorney, seeing that the witness had paused. Mrs. Berners was there. Describe her appearance. She was very much agitated, as was quite natural. Had she anything in her hand? Yes, answered Clement Pendleton, who never added a word against Sybil that he could honestly keep back. Witness, you are here to tell the whole truth without reservation. What was it that the prisoner held in her hand? A dagger. The dagger, added poor Clement Pendleton recklessly, with which the unknown assassin had killed Mrs. Blondell. Stay, we are going a little too fast here. Are you prepared to swear that you know of your own knowledge that some person other than the prisoner at the bar killed Mrs. Blondell? Captain Pendleton was a soldier and no lawyer, yet he saw at once how his faith in Sybil's innocence had led him to the false step of stating inferences for facts, so he explained, I spoke in accordance with my own firm convictions. Ah, but I fancy your own conviction will not prevent that of the prisoner, commented the state's attorney with a grim humor. And now, Captain Pendleton, he continued, as you are sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, I must trouble you to answer the questions here put to you by stating exactly such facts as came under your personal observation only. And then he resumed the examination of the witness and drew from him a relation of all the fatal circumstances that occurred in the library at Blackhall on the night of the tragedy, among them the guilty appearance of Sybil Berners with the reeking dagger in her crimson hand, and the dying declaration of the murdered woman, charging, I spelled charging with an E, charging Sybil Berners with her death. He would have gone on and told Sybil's own explanation of her appearance, but was stopped there by the state's attorney, at whose request the presiding judge instructed him that such declarations on the part of the accused could not be received in evidence. And so he was told to withdraw. I will not weary my readers with any detailed account of this trial. A slight sketch of the principal points will be sufficient for our purpose. There were some half-dozen more witnesses who had been present at the death of Rosa Blondell, and who, being duly sworn, corroborated the testimony of Captain Pendleton. Then the Scotch nurse, Jenny Magruder, was called to the stand. Her testimony bore very heavily upon the accused. She told how, on the night of the murder, she had, according to her custom, carefully searched both the bedchamber and the nursery that constituted Mrs. Blondell's apartments, that finding no intruder there, she had securely fastened all the windows and all the doors of the two rooms, with the exception of the door leading to the staircase communicating with Mrs. Berners' apartment, which were immediately above those of Mrs. Blondell. This door was always left unfastened, as it was thought perfectly safe to leave it so. She told how, while she was with the child in the nursery that same night, she was startled by hearing piercing screams from the adjoining bedroom, that she had rushed there in time to see the deceased Rosa Blondell running wildly from the room, followed by the prisoner Sybil Berners, who had a dagger in her hand. She also corroborated the testimony of the other witnesses as to the fatal words of the dying woman charging the prisoner with her death. After this witness came a number of others who testified to the ill feeling which existed between the prisoner and the deceased. These witnesses were all in turn severely cross-examined by the counsel for the defense, but as the state's attorney had said, their testimony was so clear and simple that it was impossible to involve them in any self-contradiction. The state's attorney had also been very careful to call the attention of the jury to each condemning point of the fatal evidence against the accused. And here the examination of witnesses on the part of the prosecution closed, and the court adjourned. Sybil was conducted into the sheriff's room, where refreshments were provided by that kind-hearted officer for herself and her friends, and where everything possible was done and said to support her under the terrible ordeal of her trial. Being still under bail, as she would be to the end of her trial, she was then permitted to return home with her friends for the night. One little touching event must be recorded here, as it showed the thoughtful tenderness of her nature, even in the midst of her anguish of anxiety. In regard to the awful issues and the result of the child, she remembered baby Crow and his small interests, and she stopped in the village to procure for him that something good which she had promised. But to do the orphan justice, he was gladder to see Sybil than to get what she brought him. Miss Tabby caught her in her arms and wept over her. Raphael did not weep, nor even speak, but he clasped her hands and looked at her with a silent grief more eloquent than words or tears. It was a period of agony to all concerned, and Sybil was indeed indebted to opium. What? And Sybil was indebted to opium for all the sleep she got that night. Well, that's interesting. All right then, bruvs. Goodbye. Goodbye.